Welcome to the latest edition of the OmniTalk Spotlight Series, the series where we discuss the technologies, the companies, and the people that we believe are shaping the future of retail. And today we've got a special return engagement. Today we are joined by David Sobey, the co-founder and CEO of Happy Returns. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris.
Man, it is great to have you back. I'm excited about this one. Ann, gosh, we've been a fan again. I think we said this the last time. How long has it been now?
Oh, since back in California when we went to the first returns bar you guys were doing in Santa Monica Place, I think.
Yeah, it was like
2015 or something. Yeah.
April 2016.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I know that was, and it was, I don't think I told you, I haven't told you this either, but that podcast we did, which I don't remember when it was, it's probably close to a year ago now, maybe not quite a year, but that is actually one of our most listened to podcasts of all time. So I think it's in our top 5 of all time. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually number 2 all time for those listening. So we wanted to have David back because his company has been making some serious waves of late, just like in the last couple weeks, a series of huge announcements. And so we asked David to come on and just break those down for us. We're going to get to those in a minute. But most importantly, I think let's start for those that are maybe new to Happy Returns, new to OmniTalk, new to the podcast. Break it down for us. What is Happy Returns? How did you guys start? Tell us what you're all about first before we get going.
Yeah. So Happy Returns is tackling the painful challenge of returning products purchased online, which you could probably guess from the name. So we sell 2 things. We sell return software and reverse logistics to retailers who sell online. And the idea is that we want to, our mission statement as a company is to make returns beautiful. Which is kind of a funny thing. And I always say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, in this case, in the eye of the stakeholder. And so making returns beautiful, we think about shoppers who want a friction-free experience. Retailers, a beautiful return for a merchant is one that either never happens because instead of a refund, it ends up being an exchange, or a low-cost return is a beautiful return. And then for the planet, a beautiful return is one that doesn't involve lots of cardboard or greenhouse gas wastes, right? A beautiful return is one that's sustainable. And so that's kind of our mission as a business. The way we get into this is kind of a cool story. I met my partner, Mark Geller, about a decade ago. We were both working for a flash sale retailer here in Los Angeles called HauteLook. And if you know the HauteLook story, we ended up getting bought by Nordstrom. And so one of the programs that Mark and I worked on together after they bought us was letting HauteLook shoppers buy online, because we were an online only business, and return products to Nordstrom Rack stores. And sort of marrying what we did, which was e-commerce, with what Nordstrom Rack had, which was a physical footprint. And so the insights that we gained building that return to Rack program are directly what led to founding the company. And when we went out to raise money, our seed round, we kind of said, hey, we're the guys that built, Return to Rack, and we want to replicate that case study. The sort of elevator pitch was, buy online, return to store for retailers without stores. And we said, hey, we're just going to, replicate, take what we learned, which is that if you give online shoppers the choice, print a label, pack it up, tape it up, wait to get your money back, or go in person to a physical location and drop your items off, they overwhelmingly prefer, to drop it off. And from a logistics perspective, if you can get that first mile free, right? In logistics, everyone talks about the last mile cost. Well, in returns, it's reverse logistics, so it's the first mile. And so if you can get that customer to drop that item off, now you've gotten the first mile free. It sort of unlocks all these opportunities to save money and be more efficient on the logistics side.
You said something there, David, too, I want to ask you about. You said the overwhelming preference. Like, what is the preference there? Do you have any metrics on that? I'm just curious. I didn't get to ask you that the last time, like that people prefer to just drop it off versus like try to send it back.
Yeah, so true story. When we launched the Return to Rack program, everyone put $5 in a pool in the office, and they had to guess like what % of HauteLook's returns would go back to Rack. 6 months of launch. The high guess in the pool was like 30%. And so fast forward 6 months, the number was actually 75%.
Oh, that's right. I think I remember this now. Yeah.
And if you today, I don't think Nordstrom discloses this, but today it's like, up over 80% of HauteLook's returns go back to the Rack. So, 4 in 5 shoppers, if you give them the choice, print, we talk about like the arts and crafts project of mailing a return back or getting your car and going somewhere, interacting with a human, having your refund or exchange initiated on the spot. Well, they, overwhelmingly prefer to do that because, returning online purchases sucks. Like, let's just be honest. It's like completely broken. I was gonna say it's broken from a consumer experience, but it's also really broken from a merchant experience as well. And so that's, a big part of what we're trying to do is, as I said, remove that friction from the shopper side, but really make it more efficient for retailers.
Got it. And so transition then. I say, so for pre-COVID, what was the business model then in implementation? And then we'll talk about how you've had to pivot some things, I imagine.
Yeah. So in really simple terms, we, as I said, we sell the two things. We sell software that basically enables return portals on retailer websites. And then we connect that shopper online return and exchange flow experience to physical drop-off points. And so pre-COVID, we had 700 of these physical drop-off points. So, hey, I have to do a return. I start on the retailer's website. I either return or exchange, and I get a QR code and directions to a drop-off point. Walk into the drop-off point, scan the QR code, and have my refund or exchange initiated, right there on the spot. So pre-COVID, we're rocking. We've got, 30, 40 customers and 700 of these drop-off points, and we're growing. And 2020 was supposed to be all about big customers. And then COVID hit, and in a 2-week period, we went from having 700 drop-off locations open to 0, because all of our locations were in physical retail, shopping malls, and then
Right.
big partner networks like we work with PaperSource and Cost Plus World Market, and all those stores closed. And so, we're there sort of scratching our heads first week of April going, now what, right?
Now what, right? Yeah, that's a huge pivot. Holy crap.
Well, and there was there were a couple of questions. One was like, will physical retail come back? Well, sure. We all assume physical retail will come back at some point. The other was, will shoppers be willing to come do this task in person? Will they want to actually have that interaction? And so,
and weren't there questions about return handling and safety and things like that too? Like, weren't you up against that kind of dynamic as well at that point in time? I kind of remember that being an issue.
Yeah, there were a lot of, early days of COVID, no one knew, right? Does the virus live on a surface? Could it be transmitted through something that someone tried on, et cetera? So there were all these completely understandable, but unfounded concerns, as it turns out, around, just the interaction of handing somebody goods. So, what ended up happening was retail slowly started to reopen. The first states were in May, and then, June, July were kind of when things started coming back online. We modified our process to be completely contact-free. So that was one really big thing. And that was, to try to give shoppers the confidence that this was still safe, but also for our location partners. They were excited about the foot traffic, but then the employees were saying, hey, is this going to be safe?
Right.
We went to completely contact-free, meaning you have to start with a QR code to facilitate the drop-off. What the QR code does is it lets it be far faster, and we even engineered the process such that the shopper the shopper holds up their QR code, the store associate hands them a poly bag and says, you bag the item, right? And then the shopper holds up the poly bag. Again, with the item in it, so that the QR code on the outside of the poly bag can be scanned, sort of connecting the return with the physical item. And then the shopper puts, the item into one of our shipping totes, one of the reusable totes. And so the whole process could be contact-free. So that was kind of step one.
Wow.
Step two was then kind of getting all of our location partners back online. And this was, my gosh, it was like, imagine like a big spreadsheet with the states and the municipalities and the partner and, what can be open in Texas versus, California, San Francisco, New York, New Jersey was closed for retail for a long time. So it was this patchwork of what's coming online when, and making sure that our partners all knew that we had made these changes around QR codes being mandatory. And so that was kind of, we dealt with over the summer. And then, the other thing which we kind of leaned into when the discussions with merchants sort of understandably, were put on hold, was really trying to lean into partnerships and trying to lean into things that could de-risk the company and sort of build a thriving ecosystem around, what we do. And so you mentioned at the outset some of the announcements we've had. The two big ones were a partnership with FedEx that we announced last week. to offer FedEx Office. There are 2,000 of these locations around the country that now accept Happy Returns. So,
yeah, let's talk about that in a second. I want to ask you one thing though before we get to that, because I think that is definitely the meat of the bones here, the FedEx partnership and the Inmar Intelligence partnership that you guys just announced. But like from a management perspective too, because a lot of startups that listen to us as well, in addition to the retailers, they're trying to get into the space. Like, how did you manage all that? Like, you're not near each other. Like, that's a massive pivot. And those three things you just outlined, like, not only is it a massive pivot, it's kind of, excuse my language, but it's like a come to Jesus moment of like, how are we going to make this happen? Like, how did you as the CEO manage through all that? What were you doing to kind of get to the point where you could diversify your risks, so to speak?
Yeah. I would say that this was like a really humbling experience, because I think as a startup CEO, co-founder, you think like, oh, we're just going to work harder, or we're going to work smarter. I'm willing to put in more hours. I'm willing to and this was not one of those situations. It was so humbling because it was like, look, there's just these things that are totally out of your control.
Right.
And there's like some freedom in that in a way,
How so?
Well, I remember saying to our board, like, hey, remember when we met last December and we gave you those scenarios, and our worst case scenario was here? Well, we didn't predict that there was actually an even worse.
Way beyond that.
It's like, this is closed. And there's sort of freedom in that, like, no one saw it coming, and there's really not a whole lot we can, and I think what if there's one thing that I'm kind of really focused on now, it's not trying to worry about the things that are out of our control, like really just trying to focus. And so to some degree, that means like much more shorter term thinking. It's like, what can I do right now? And some of these things are really obvious. It was like, hey, if our business is at risk because our locations are closed because we're in retail, we got to have a partner that's not a retail partner, that isn't subject to this, right? Like that was just like super apparent. That was one. Another was, we have to give people confidence that this process is safe. And that was the whole contact-free piece. It was like, without those two things, we don't have a business. So there's like this, like all the noise gets tuned out, and you're just like, all right, like 2 problems that I have to solve. That's it. 2 problems, right?
Brass tacks.
Yeah.
Right. Well, David, one thing that you do have going for you, I think, especially as we saw this increase in online ordering and the amount of returns, I imagine, as a result, is that, people's days are driven by having to make those returns. The choices that they're making about where they're going to do those returns are largely driven by what's in and around the place, whether it's, the FedEx store or the Walmart or or the paper source. They're designing their days around these trips. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that partnership with FedEx, and you're now at all of the FedEx Office locations. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be.
Yeah. So we've worked with FedEx for years as a carrier partner.
Okay.
We ship a lot of stuff. And so we have worked, we've worked with FedEx, we've worked with UPS. Probably 2.5 years ago, we kind of consolidated all of our shipping with FedEx. They're a really cool company. I've gotten to know that team and that business really well. And, I think we have this image of like FedEx being kind of a stodgy company to some degree, like, oh, they're one of these 2 carriers that are this duopoly. But, like FedEx is only 50 years old. And, 50 years ago, they were the kind of original disruptor of logistics. And
right.
They were like 50 years ago, they were a scrappy startup that was like, hey, there's a better way. And, they pioneered overnight. They were the first ones to kind of pioneer tracking of shipments. They were kind of I joke with our team, like they're the original gangster of e-commerce logistics disruption.
I tell Ann all the time too, their founding story is really interesting. Like the guy like bet money at the roulette table or something to like make payroll. Like, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And they have this really cool thing. It's called the Purple Promise. And the Purple Promise, I think that the actual Purple Promise is that, every employee makes it, which is, I will make every FedEx experience outstanding. And when you name your company Happy Returns, you kind of have the same ethos, right? Like that's your promise right there. So as we got to know them as a carrier partner, it just became apparent that there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that are, we have a lot in common, and we kind of view the world similarly. And so it was just a natural outgrowth of talking to them about, some of the technology that they are introducing. FedEx has the size and the scope of that organization are pretty massive. They own a bunch of technology in relation to reverse logistics and supply chain. And so a lot of the ideas that we had were things that were kind of already existed inside of FedEx, and we were just kind of discovering the people who, were thinking like us. And so, we spent a lot of time I've been to Memphis, I've been to FedEx offices headquartered in Plano, it's the old Kinko's. They own a business in Pittsburgh, which is their sort of supply chain business. So we've spent time there with teams. And really, I think it was like, hey, there's a lot we could do together. The most obvious thing that we needed and that they have is this distribution network, if you will, in FedEx Office, right? And 2,000 FedEx offices around the country that are deemed an essential service and are open, we're open and will continue to be open regardless of pandemic-related closures. And so it was kind of like a no-brainer, like this just makes sense and this is where we should start, is the idea of Happy Returns, customers, so the brands we work with, being able to let their shoppers return to FedEx Office. And so FedEx Office, we announced last week, is that it's now official. They've joined the Happy Returns network. And if you kind of think about what's happening in shipping right now, the demand for shipping services, as you point out, Anne, e-commerce sort of accelerated 3 to 5 years and overnight. So there's just a lot more demand than there's capacity. And so anything that FedEx can do to increase the capacity and have, be able to deliver on that purple promise and have a great customer experience, they're very interested in. Well, we kind of fit the bill in both those, right? Because we aggregate, we facilitate aggregated shipping because we're trying to remove friction from the consumer experience. So there was just a lot of this just makes sense. And that was kind of how the partnership came about.
And I think the other cool part of the announcement too that I wanted to ask you about, and this was a big reason I wanted to have you on the show today, was it also gives you some interesting access points, right? Like if I remember reading right in the press release, aren't some of these inside retail stores too, like Walmart and things like that, so that as I'm a consumer and I'm wanting to return things, like Anne said, I can do that on my Walmart shopping trip, right? That's kind of a cool little byproduct of this whole thing. Am I right, or how are you thinking about that?
So of the 2,000, 343 of them are what they call shop-in-shops, where
243
office is actually inside of a Walmart.
Another essential business.
Yeah, another essential business. That's right. And so, back to where our business started, the Return Bar network inside of retail that we originally built was meant to say for shoppers, hey, there's a utility in this trip, right? You can go to a paper source and do your return, and then while you're there, maybe you'll buy something. So the Walmart angle is really, really interesting. The fact that we sort of have COVID-proofed the business. And then I got to say, the breadth and depth that it gives us is really cool. And so I'm going to give you some stats. So yesterday, we had, it was yesterday was our first day of operating. There were over 600 visits to FedEx offices yesterday. And a lot of them were in places that we've never had, in-person returns before. So Poughkeepsie, New York, and Canton, Ohio, and Green Bay, Wisconsin, and all these other places where there's a FedEx office that they're never going to have returns before. It also gives us massive depth. And what I mean by depth is density. So we now have 195 locations in the New York metro area, 162 in the LA metro area. And that kind of density, even if you're Macy's, right? Macy's has 600.
Yeah, you're right.
They don't have 195 locations in the New York metro area, right? And so it's just the density of coverage and the idea of, a Happy Returns location being as convenient as any other task that you have is what this brings. And so what we're excited about is this is just, we're kind of ushering in this era where what we do, box-free, in-person drop-off of e-commerce returns, is now just going to be table stakes, right? The same way kind of free shipping became table stakes, 5-6 years ago. This idea of box-free, in-person, returns is now the norm.
Yeah, that last point's really salient too, because you really the availability of where the access points are to do that is changing rapidly in that regard.
Yeah, and I would say, I would be remiss to suggest that it's just Happy Returns. I mean, Amazon is playing a huge part in this as well.
Oh, for sure.
But what I always say to retailers is like, next time you buy something on Amazon, go look at the return options, and you'll see, return to Whole Foods, return to Kohl's, return to Amazon store, return to the UPS store, right? Like all of those are presented before you get print a label. All of those are box free. All of those are facilitated by a QR code. All of those enable, what Amazon calls a provisional refund, but basically an immediate refund. Those guys in Seattle are pretty smart, and they're excited about getting the first mile free too.
Yeah, they know where the puck's going. Yeah, I mean, you're set up. I think you're set up to draft off the tailwind too of like things like with Walmart and what they're doing with Shopify potentially in terms of their expanded partnership, and then with these locations of FedEx stores inside Walmart's to capitalize on some of that movement over time as well. I think it's fascinating.
I do too. I mean, there's a storyline in like the Amazon ecosystem and the non-Amazon ecosystem and the companies and technologies that are enabling the non-Amazon, right? And so one of the things I've said to retailers is like, we offer an Amazon-like return experience with Amazon-like economics for everyone that's not Amazon. And, try to kit this together yourself would be really hard unless you have the sort of scale that they do. Well, it's companies like Walmart, it's companies like Shopify, FedEx, I'd like to believe Happy Returns, that are enabling that ecosystem of non-Amazon transactions that have that same kind of high bar from a service and perspective and a scale that offers compelling unit economics.
Mm-hmm.
And now, David, that's not the only announcement that you guys have had in the last couple of weeks. You also made an announcement with Inmark. Will you tell us a little bit about that arrangement or partnership and what that means for future Happy Returns?
Yeah, this one I'm equally excited about. Inmar is a massive player in reverse logistics. To kind of give you some sense of the scale, they process 600 million returns a year.
Is that a lot?
Yeah, we're neck and neck. But this is a business that's been around for 50 years. They have facilities all over the country. They work with some of the biggest, the biggest names in retail on the return side. And what's really neat about, it's not just the scale they operate, but the intelligence. The company's Inmar Intelligence and the intelligence around, what do I do with this return, and where is the next best place to sell it? And I always use the simple.
Okay.
We read a lot in apparel, and I always use the simple example of like a swimsuit at the end of the summer. If you're the retailer that sold that, man, you don't want that swimsuit to be returned in September, because what are you going to do with it? You're going to pay to get it back, and you're going to pay to put it back on the shelf, and it's just going to sit there for months. You carrying the cost of the inventory until the spring, where you'll have to mark it down because the next year's swimsuits are out and no one wants last year's. And right. And so, the intelligence layer that Inmar has around intelligent dispositioning, that's stuff that we've had, dreams on the whiteboard of for 5 years now. And to be able to partner with somebody that sort of kits together what we do, which, we think is pretty neat, with the scale that they operate on and the intelligence that they've developed over decades is pretty special.
As you're explaining these things, all of the information that you're getting from now 2,000 FedEx locations and some of the shop in shops, the 300 plus shop in shops and Walmarts, and this partnership with Inmar, are you thinking about, is there a future where Happy Returns is its own standalone entity? Like, as we're thinking about how retail is evolving, and I think even like street level use cases or, open vacancies that are coming about now because of this kind of transition that retail is going through. I mean, how are you guys thinking about taking all of these components that you're working on right now and applying those to a future strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's, we've been around for 5 years. We've raised $25 million in venture capital. And I think we have a discipline around trying to be as asset light as we can be.
Sure.
And what's funny is like we started like our first return bar, the first physical drop-off point was literally one that we built a kiosk and we had it and staffed it, and we had people that would show up every day wearing a Happy Returns shirt, and they would stand there. You guys remember this? You were there, right?
Yeah, we've seen it. Yeah.
You know, and then it was like, well, how do you scale that across the country? Well, you know, man, that'd be a lot of employees. That'd be a lot of kiosks you'd have to build, a lot of leases you'd have to sign. And so we kind of transitioned to this, you know, let's use the concierge desk in the mall because, you know, they're already providing shopper services. The mall's already has that space and has employees standing there. And so that was kind of, you know, it was natural from like, let's own and operate. So let's sort of rent the concierge. So then let's, you know, go into physical retail, like our PaperSource partnership, and now into FedEx, where, you know, we've actually integrated our technology directly into the FedEx office. So, you know, you walk in with a QR code, you don't even have to tell them it's a Happy Returns QR code. You just hold up your phone and scan it with the gun, and it pulls up inside of the browser-based system that FedEx uses. So it's kind of a natural evolution. But the point I'm trying to make to your question, Ann, is like, I think we're believers in this like asset light. Let's, you know, what's really important about what we do is sort of the software layer, you know, enabling these kind of things. Let's, to the extent that we can, use other folks' capabilities and other existing infrastructure. To apply that to like the Inmar partnership, you know, today we operate these two processing hubs, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. Well, eventually, hopefully sometime in the very near future, we're going to run out of capacity in those. We're going to need to have more processing space. Let's not go sign another lease and you know, let's see if we can figure out a way to capitalize on what infrastructure Inmar already has. You know, just as an example, to operate, maybe we talk about it internally as the hub in hub, meaning, you know, one of our facilities inside of, say, a bigger Inmar facility, you know, they already have the space, they already have the employees. What they don't necessarily have and what we could offer is sort of the software layer and the processing methods. You know, this is how we work. Great, let's marry that with what Inmar already is capable of doing, so that we can continue to be kind of an asset light business that has, you know, we're connecting the dots via software. Yeah, it was a long-winded answer. Did that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. I think it's spoken like a true entrepreneur, right? I mean, don't invest too far in things that, you know, don't get too far ahead of yourself. You got to make it work bit by bit. And clearly, you know, you guys have found a lot of success doing that. So kudos to you, David.
Thanks. You know, I sometimes when I talk about it to friends, I'm like, it's kind of like putting a puzzle together. You know, but what's interesting is like I'm big into puzzles, and you know, I start with the border, right? You separate the pieces.
Sure.
Remember, start with the border. Like, what's interesting about this business is that sometimes you have a choice what you work on, other times you don't. You know, sometimes you can say, I want to work in this, other times it's like, no, you got to solve this part of the puzzle right now. And so there's like a sequencing piece that, you know, is sometimes you have the choice, other times you don't.
Say sometimes the puzzle might be two colors, or sometimes it might have colors and patterns that are really easy to figure out in terms of deciding where to start too. So that's awesome, man. Well, hey, you know, this has been a great conversation. I think the reason we love doing this with you is like we can literally hit record, and it's such a natural conversation because we've known you for such a long time, and it's so interesting and engaging for us to hear where all this is headed, because it really is one of the things at the front line, I think, in terms of how people are changing their shopping habits in general and what their expectations are around how they should shop. To close us up, what can we expect from you next? Can you give us any teases of, you know, what to expect here at the back half of the year or into next year?
Yeah, well, so we're headed into what I think is going to be a lot of fun, right?
Insane, yeah.
This holiday is going to be the holiday season that's really defined by e-commerce playing the most prominent role it's ever played. The good news when you're in the returns business is, you know, more online shopping typically leads to more returns. And with the footprint we have now, I feel really excited about, you know, being able to participate in this season in a way that we haven't, just because of the scale that we're now operating. So, you know, holiday is a really big focus for us. You know, we also, you know, I mentioned early that when, you know, our merchant conversations, our sort of sales pipeline, you know, dried up, most of those conversations are now back. So I think there's going to be more big retailers that we work with. But this idea of like building an ecosystem around your company, I don't think that was as apparent to us in the first 5 years as it is now. And so things like the platforms that we integrate with, how we participate in those, and I'll just pick on Shopify because they're, the kind of most prominent example of this, like really leaning into those ecosystems to say, we're not just an app that sits in the Shopify marketplace, but how we play with all these other, puzzle pieces that a merchant, would be putting together to try truly operate at scale. So a lot more to come in that area. Stuff that, we'll hopefully be in market talking about in Q1 next year. But again, it's kind of this recognition that, as you said, this is part of a bigger story, which is kind of how retail is changing. Returns plays a big part in that. And so where we fit in that is going to be to some degree a function of like how well we play with others and where we draw the boundaries around our business. And I think that with the FedEx partnership, the Inmar partnership, we kind of now, have some very firm lines, which is exciting. And so now it's kind of, can we just execute well and continue to grow?
Yeah, I think that was my big takeaway from the interview too, in terms of how you think about that total network and the partnerships involved. And yeah, man, hopefully, we'd love to have you back if and when those new announcements happen and that new progress happens. So I think in the meantime, if people found this engaging and interesting, like what's the best way for them to learn more about Happy Returns or get in touch with you? What should they do?
Yeah, so, happyreturns.com is our website, and there's plenty of information about the company there. I know you have a lot of people that listen, so I'm not sure I want to give my email.
You want to give the email address?
Get a lot of emails, man.
That's good. Keep talking like that, man. That's great. That's awesome. No, but hit up, check out happyreturns.com. That's the place to go. Makes a ton of sense. Hey, to everyone listening out there, again, David Sobey, the co-founder and CEO of Happy Returns. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I know Ann and I definitely did. And as always, it's now more important than ever. Be careful out there.